All right, this House will come back to order. House will come back to order. Mr. Clerk, you want to ring the bell? Clerk will read the caption to a group of privileged resolutions.
Recognizing and commending the National League of Cities Mayors Challenge to End Veterans Homelessness. Commending Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Recognizing and commending Juan Ramirez Hernandez for his outstanding career as a composer, violinist, conductor, and community service advocate. Commending the Pierce County High School competition cheerleading team on their undefeated season. Commending Jonas Martin Strecker, the 2018 Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending John Sowell. Commending police chiefs and other heads of law enforcement agencies in the state and recognizing Tuesday, March 14, 2019 as Police Chiefs and Head of Law Enforcement Agencies Recognition Day at the state capitol, and for other purposes. That completes the reading of the privilege resolutions.
Is there any objection to adopting the privilege resolutions? The chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. At the request of the author, House Bill 319 will be postponed to the next legislative day. House Bill 319. The author is not here, and so we're going to carry it over till tomorrow's rules calendar. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 316.
House Bill 316 by Representative Fleming of the 121st, Jones of the 47th, Burns 159th, Reinders of the 152nd, Watson of the 172nd, and others, to be titled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 21, the official code of Georgia annotated relating to primaries and elections generally, so as to provide for definitions, to provide for related matters, to provide for an effective date. This bill having referred to the Committee on Governmental Affairs, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
The Rules Committee has voted to limit debate on House Bill 316 to 1 hour total, with the time to be allocated at the discretion of the chair and the chair will allocate 30 minutes to each side. That does not include the initial presentation by the author. It does not include the minority report, and it does not include the chairman's time. So just so that we have all of the rules outlined here. Chair recognizes Chairman Barry Fleming to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, today in passing House Bill 316, we can put our voters first in Georgia and bring us into the 21st century with common sense reforms and straightforward solutions. Georgia's current voting election system is 17 years old, and the question is not if we should update our voting system, but how we should do that. The answer to that depends on why you believe we need new systems in the first place. House Bill 316 would uniformly update Georgia's voting machines and incorporate an all-new paper ballot component. More specifically, House Bill 316 switches our state to a touchscreen marked paper ballot system. Voters will make their selections on touchscreens, devices similar to those we use now. The touchscreen ballot marker will print a paper ballot with an exact copy of the voter's digital selections. After reviewing the paper ballot for accuracy, the voter will then submit their paper ballot to be scanned and counted. Currently, jurisdictions in about 24 of our states use a touchscreen marked paper ballot system, primarily due to the fairly obvious advantages in voter accuracy and voter accessibility. Touchscreen ballot markers leave absolutely no room for doubt of voter intent, since voters make a clear choice with the touch of a button. Reverting back to any other form of a voting system, including a pencil-marked paper ballot, could easily force our state into a hanging Chad type situation that was in Florida in 2000. With a pencil-marked ballot, election officials, attorneys, and partisan vote reviewers have to interpret stray and accidental pencil marks on improperly completed ballots, meaning that a voter may have their vote counted incorrectly or completely invalidated. Using a touchscreen ballot marker is much like choosing to use a typewriter to send an important letter instead of handwriting it, so that the recipient will understand your message exactly as intended. Not only do touchscreen ballot markers provide the most accuracy and clarity in elections, but they also provide peace of mind through an auditable paper ballot. The paper ballot enables voters to double-check their choices before casting their ballot and allows the counties to audit election results. Most importantly, touchscreen ballot markers are carefully designed to prevent interference, which is why they are never connected to the internet and come equipped with external cabinetry that prevents physical tampering. It is far easier to fortify and monitor a touchscreen ballot system than it is to systematically secure pencil-marked ballots. Moving Georgia backwards to a pencil-marked ballot system means that elections could be tampered with by anyone with a pencil, since a stray mark can completely spoil a ballot, and since an eraser can easily change someone's vote. Touchscreen marked paper ballots will also be the most accessible for voters of all abilities, thanks to adjustable size text, large buttons, and options for hearing impaired. Touchscreen ballot markers are best situated to meet the needs of the handicapped and the elderly. Moreover, retaining the touchscreen element that Georgia voters have used now for close to 2 decades will significantly reduce confusion and promote continuity the new system will implement. House Bill 316 will enable our state to invest in the most secure, the most accurate, and the most transparent voting machines. It's the legislation that common sense demands, but it's also the legislation that is overwhelmingly supported by over 95% of our election board supervisors, as well as 79% of the general public. House Bill 316 will bring our state to the forefront of election technology. It will introduce common sense, straightforward measures that will make sure every eligible vote counts and every eligible voter has a choice. It builds on the successes of our old system and incorporates the best practices of modern day. And it is a clear choice for Georgia voters. Not only is this legislation the product of 4 different hearings by the Government Affairs Committee and hours of testimony where every witness who wanted to be heard was allowed to speak, but it is also the result of months of work by a special commission formed last year to review this whole process of a new voting system for our state. Moving forward, the governor has put sufficient funds in the budget to accomplish this task, and our Secretary of State is prepared to move ahead with a request for proposal process, an RFP, to allow the several vendors to compete with each other to make sure Georgia not only gets a great system, but we get it at the best cost possible. Our Secretary of State hopes to use the 2019 municipal elections as somewhat of a test run for our new equipment and begin to deploy the new system in our 2020 elections. Besides the major portion of this legislation being the selection of a new voting system, House Bill 316 also contains several updates to our elections process. Besides the addition of an all-important audit process for our new system, the bill also implements new processes for our absentee balloting. It provides a method to inform voters who have problems with their absentee ballots so those can be corrected. House Bill 316 incorporates prohibitions against changing polling places too close to elections and also institutes a new system referred to as the acronym ERIC, Electronic Registration Information Center, to make sure our states communicate with each other when people move to other states and register to vote elsewhere. House Bill 316 is a bipartisan measure incorporating bills sponsored by Democrats, incorporating ideas given to us by the leadership of the minority party, and also through the committee process by accepting several amendments offered from the other side of the aisle. In short, House Bill 316 is the right legislation to move our state forward today. I would commend it to you and ask for your favorable vote. And Mr. Speaker, I would be happy to answer any questions I could.
You have a couple of questions if you care to yield.
Yes, sir, I will yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Dreyer to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, Counselor, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 brief questions for you. Isn't it true that the current bill does not prohibit barcodes being placed on the printed ballots from the machine?
The gentleman's question goes to the fact that there are probably 7, 8, maybe 9 different vendors in the country that cater to states to give us different options for paper ballot system like we are promoting today. It is true that some of those vendors offer ballots which would have a barcode device on it and some do not. The goal of this legislation is not to bar any of those vendors from competing in the Secretary of State's request for proposal process. So all those vendors with all those different types of machines would be allowed to bid in this process and prove to us through an RFP process which one would be the best.
Does the gentleman yield for one more question?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that the minority leader this morning made a motion and rules to amend the bill so that there would be no barcodes and that motion was not accepted?
And I asked the minority leader if I accepted his amendment, would he support the bill, because he said it would improve it and make it good. And he said, I believe, no, he would not. So I did not agree to that amendment, and the Rules Committee agreed with my interpretation, and here's why. If you specify exactly inside this bill what kind of system we're going to go to that specificity, you will basically make this a sole source contract, and here's why. There are, like I said, 8 or 9 different vendors out there, depending on how you count it. A couple of them have come up with a system whereby you could fit into the minority leader's amendment this morning. However, one of those companies is a small company. We're not sure that they would have the ability to fill the order for all 159 counties of a state that is now the 8th or 7th largest in the nation. The other company certainly could, but I think it is important that we not make this a sole source contract with only one vendor possibly could bid on it, because as all of us know, when you have one person that can fill your order, this is what usually happens to the price. It goes up considerably. We need to give our Secretary of State the possibility to look at all those options out there and come up with the best choice.
That a barcode could be on the ballot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you further yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to.
The chair recognizes Representative Morris to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Absolutely.
Is it not true that this bill provides an audit trail for the first time ever in the state of Georgia, thus ensuring the integrity of our elections?
I think the gentleman is exactly right, and I touched on that, and I'll expand upon it a little bit here. Whatever type system we go with, the audit process that is put in place inside this legislation may be one of the most important parts of the new voting system, and here's why. After the election has occurred, the Secretary of State and the State Board of Elections will put into process an audit system. This could look several different ways. One way would be that randomly each county has to select one precinct and audit that and make sure the vote tallies that were turned in match the actual paper that was voted on for that precinct. I would expect over time that audit process would change with the Secretary of State's office and the Board of Elections. It may get to where we actually put the exact form into legislation one day after we see what kind of new machines we have. But that audit process that verifies the votes will give great confidence, I believe, to our voters in Georgia, and I appreciate you pointing that out.
Do you further yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Holcomb to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
There are two things that you said that I'm not sure are accurate to those who are proponents of a hand-marked paper ballot system. The first is that you referenced hanging chads, and hanging chads would not be part of any hand-marked paper ballot system, would they?
The reference to hanging chads, Representative, goes to the fact that most of the problems we saw in Florida was where people interacted with changing paper, whether it be placing marks on it, and some of the problems they did have were with people filling out ovals during that time period. The term hanging chad is a general term that people use to refer to the debacle that occurred in Florida, which actually led to our Secretary of State and then Democratic Governor Roy Barnes and Kathy Cox implementing the current system that we had. So when I reference hanging chads, I reference not only that aspect of it, but the general idea of people putting marks on paper, or in that case, punching out holes in paper.
Okay. Will the gentleman yield further?
Yes, sir.
You also mentioned pencils, and I've been working on this for a couple of years, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone who advocates hand-marked paper ballots recommend pencils be part of that. Is that something that you're hearing?
I have seen that, and I have heard that, and amongst those vendors out there, some do offer that. There are other options where it could be a pen. But whether it's a pencil or a pen, a stray mark here and there, when you have people filling in ovals, whether it be with a pen or pencil, sometimes they will circle the name of Scott Holcomb rather than marking that name. Sometimes they will strike through the name of the person above it, think that they're voting for Scott Holcomb. It puts into play what was the voter's intent. The system that is in this bill, there will be no question about how someone intended to vote, because when they hit print after they've touched the screen, they will get a piece of paper where they can verify who they voted for, and if it's not right, they can spoil that ballot, as it's referred to in the elections process, and they can start all over again.
Well, I do appreciate in your example you having people actually voting for me, so thank you for that.
I didn't say what kind of people they were and how smart they were. I said they might vote for you.
Do you further yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Chair recognizes Chairman Knight to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Isn't it true that I have some audit background and knowledge?
I think you're a CPA, if I'm not mistaken.
Just to follow up to one of the earlier questions, if you will, again, to reiterate the audit process. So we actually have a paper ballot that will come out, no markings on it, that will ultimately serve as a paper trail. Is that not true?
That is absolutely correct. And that audit process is there, as you know, anytime you do an audit, whether it be with a business or a local government, is to assure that the figures that are on the paper are correct.
So further question,
Yes, sir.
if the gentleman will yield. So regardless if there's a barcode or not on this piece of paper, depending on what vendor, isn't it true that everyone will have a name across so that ultimately there is an audit trail that marks whoever, if it's Barry Fleming, David Knight, whoever, and that will ultimately be the audit trail so that there is no mistakes and there are no human interaction. It is plain what's on the paper.
The gentleman is right and makes a very good point there. No matter what kind of system that we might choose, you have an optical scan, a computer, an electronic system, looking at the position of a piece of ink on a piece of paper, whether it be the name that it actually reads, so to speak, because that name is gauged by marks that go around the outside of the ballot. It knows where to look for that name, or if it's a barcode, whichever kind of system that is. The audit process is different. The audit process requires eyes on paper to read a name, and that's how the audit is checked. So when you point out that the audit process will fortify and give confidence to our voters in this, that's how it will work, and that is in the bill. Thank you.
Do you further yield?
Yes, sir.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it not true that there were some 125,000 votes discrepancy from the lieutenant governor race through the current DRE system that is very similar to the BMD system you're looking at?
You are absolutely incorrect that they are not similar. Now, you make a point that there was an undervote in the lieutenant governor's race. When we went through looking at these different type systems, we had Secretary of State Kathy Cox, a Democrat, who is now the Dean of the Mercer Law School, come speak before the commission that looked into this issue. And she pointed out that when we used to use paper in this state, but because before 2002, we did have paper components. There were several different types of voting systems with the various counties before we went to a uniform system. We did have a significant record of undervoting. And she also pointed out through their surveys and their studies that undervoting, for whatever reason, was more prevalent in minority precincts. So actually going back to a hand-marked paper ballot through her testimony, you would have that chance of undervoting going up. Whereas you have a touchscreen now that tells you before you print your ballot, hey, you didn't vote in this race, would you like to go back and do that? Which our current system does. She said that after we moved to the touchscreen system that we have now, the amount of undervotes went down. Now, in the particular race that you're talking about, it was the first race on the ballot, lieutenant governor, after the main race, that being governor. And in that race, there was no libertarian candidate. And if you look at the libertarian vote in the other races, you will find that they were very similar to the undervote for lieutenant governor. Now, does that mean that every libertarian decided not to vote? I don't know. But back to the main part of your question, the system that we have now will be significantly different than the system that we would propose in this legislation. And I go back to the previous statements about the audits, because going forward, if you had a similar situation, the audit would show that problem if it did indeed exist.
Thank you. Do you further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you help expound upon the success that you mentioned of our voting system currently?
It elected you. I mean, I would define success. Who in this House will stand up and volunteer and say, I really didn't get elected, the system didn't work? It always seems to be the people that did not get elected that say something's wrong with the system. Everybody that got elected seems to think it works very well. So I think the system that we have had has served us well, but it is now 17 years old. It has a shelf life. It is time to move on. That's what this bill does. It looks forward to the future, not to the past, and gives us a good system that we can count on.
Chair recognizes Representative McLeod to your right for a question. Your left, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
These voting machines proposed in HB 316, are they simply not a computer?
In the voting system that is proposed in this bill, and in the voting system that is proposed by some members of the minority that I have listened to, contains electronic devices, i.e. computers, at several different parts of the process, and I'll explain that. The electronic device that you vote with a touchscreen, as I have described, is obviously a form of a computer. The scanner that you scan your ballot into is a form of a computer, an electronic device. The tabulating system that tabulates at the county level is an electronic device or a computer. The state system at the Secretary of State's office that tabulates all the counties is obviously a computer. So if you're asking me, are you voting on a computer when you do the touchscreen? I'm going to say, well, it is an electronic device. And if you say to me by going to a hand-marked paper ballot, you would eliminate that problem with electronic devices in the system, you're not. You're just going to eliminate one possibility there and introduce the idea of a problem of voter intent.
Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so any computer can be hacked, is that correct?
I suspect any computer can be hacked, including the scanner that you want under the system that most people in the minority party have advocated of when you put the scanner through a hand-marked paper ballot.
Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that not mean that with the paper ballot that the chances of being hacked is a little bit less than?
No, ma'am, I don't think so. Because to hack a paper ballot, you don't have to use a computer. You can use something much more simple, a pen or a pencil.
Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it not true that the voting machines proposed is more costly than using a hand-marked paper ballot?
No, ma'am, I do not believe that to be the case. In fact, you had laid on your desk today a study by the Secretary of State's office which will show that at least one form of hand-marked paper ballots would be more expensive than the current system that we're proposing, and here's why. When you have hand-marked paper ballots, those ballots have to be printed. And we're not talking about printing possibly one piece of paper with my name or your name or just the people you voted for. We're talking about a much longer list with sometimes 3 or 4 candidates, electors when you're in a presidential race, for example. So the printing is much different and much more complicated when you have to print all these ballots. Think about early voting locations. In my county of about 150,000 people, we have 2 or sometimes 3 early voting locations. Now, the precincts in my county vary differently. We have 4 members of the House, we have 2 members of the Senate, we have 5 members of the school board, we have 5 county commissioners, we have 6 or 7 constitutional officers. Sometimes my ballot in my precinct is much different than the ballot on the other side of the county. But when you walk into an early voting precinct, you've got to have ballots printed for all over the county. That is why the technology and the cost of printing would not make this system, we believe, either less expensive or possibly more expensive, because you're just then shifting the cost from us up front in the state with the proposal you have in front of you to the counties over a 10-year period for having to print all those ballots.
Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you said one type of a ballot, paper ballot. What type is that?
Well, I think what I was referring to, as far as your question is concerned, is that there are different types of ways to do printing with paper ballots. And you'd have to look at different systems, but from the best estimates we have, all of them will cost at least as much or more than the system we're proposing today.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the chair of the Minority Caucus, Chairman Beverly, to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is it not true that we sat on the SAFE Commission this year that was formed by the Secretary of State, where we had members, bipartisan, and people of the community to try to figure out what the expert advice we would give to the General Assembly this year in regards to voting machines?
Yes, we did.
Is it further not true that on that expert commission, because you were the chair, that we had an expert in cybersecurity named Dr. Winky Lee?
We did.
Was he, to the best of your knowledge, was he the only cybersecurity expert that sat on that commission with us?
Should I count you?
Not today.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I yield.
Mm-hmm.
Chair recognizes Chairman Benton to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gentleman yield.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All the questions so far have been about the voting machine, but I have a question about something else. As far as the poll workers for these new machines, I noticed in the bill that there was a section that was scratched out, and right now poll workers can't help the person with their voting. Is there what is going to be their responsibility on this with the machines?
I believe that the chairman is referring to the portion of the bill where we're making a change in our law as to who can assist the voters. What we're basically going to is what is referred to as the federal standard. Our state law that had been on the books for a while was significantly brought into question as to whether or not it meshed with federal requirements. The federal standard deals more likely with the idea that, with two exceptions, that being a member of leadership of your union or a person that you're employed with, folks could help you. I do not believe that the poll worker assistance is at multiple levels, because people ask, what do I do next? But the actual voting of it, the best practices is for them to allow someone, usually a family member quite often, to assist them.
Okay. Well, the gentleman further yield.
Yes, sir.
One other thing has to do with absentee ballots.
Yes, sir.
Notice that in the section it had that the use of the signature would not be so closely scrutinized, and as a person that usually goes to vote in person, I have to show a picture ID, but the absentee ballot has no picture ID. Could you elaborate on why we are easing that restriction?
Well, I think what the gentleman is referring to is that we have put what is referred to as a cure process, or a method whereby there is a problem with an absentee ballot, where that person who has the problem ballot can be notified and given a chance to fix that problem so that their vote is counted when the election tallies come in. There is still a signature that is used during that process. There are also other safeguards in there, generally speaking, because the rule, there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, you have to sign up to vote, and that address that you give is where your absentee ballot goes to. So there are still safeguards in the system. There are situations where, if there are questions about a person and their proper registration and trying to vote on an absentee ballot, where they may have to show a photo ID. But I think there is sufficient safeguards still in the system as it regards to absentee ballots. But we're also implementing a system whereby if someone does have a problem, there's a procedure to go through to straighten that out.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I know that there are other speakers on the bill. I'll try to take a couple more questions, and then after that I'm going to yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Frazier to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you just walk me through quickly the process from the time that my constituents will re-elect me in 2020, from the time they walk into the polling station, and what they will have in their hands when they leave? Absolutely.
Of course, I'm sure the lady would agree with me. The smart folks in Burke County and Richmond County would vote for you. Wouldn't that be right? That's who we begin with. Okay.
That's correct.
So all those smart people that walk in there will, if they vote in person, have to have a photo ID just like you do now. When they leave, they very likely will have nothing else in their hand other than what they walked in with, because the paper ballot under this system that is printed is actually your ballot, and you have to scan it to vote it. And once you scan it, it is gone. It is kept in a big bin to be audited later, as we have discussed. So although you walk in and you do have at one point a paper ballot in your hand, that paper ballot is gone when you scan it. And that would be the case with either one of the systems we hear promoted here this morning by either side.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Did you say a
I'll
couple
take-
more? You have one more.
I'll take one more, Mr. Speaker, and
Chair-
then I'll wrap it up and yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Kendrick to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
I see in the section 42 of the bill, we are changing the recount from 1% to half a percent. Excuse me, from 0.5% to half of 1%.
From 1% to 0.5%.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is there a reason that we're making it harder to do that automatic?
We're not actually making it harder, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. When that 1% was put in place many, many years ago, for example, most of our House seats would contain maybe about 20,000 people given the year that you choose. There's probably a pretty good chance that after the next census, our House seats would contain about 60,000 folks. If you do the math, the number comparing 20 to 60 is actually going to be better under the 0.05%. Most of the states that have what is referred to as an automatic recount like we do, in Georgia, if it's within that percentage that will be stated in the law, you have to ask for a recount, but you don't have to pay for it. The state pays for it, and it's commonly referred to as an automatic recount. I think there are about 19, maybe 20 or so states that have that. Something like 16 or 17 of them have what I do call modernize their laws to make sure that that 0.05%, that's the general practice now. And if you think about it with the numbers that I discussed when it was originally put into law, the 0.05% is even better now. Once again, what you're getting at though were the votes counted right? You got to remember, we're also implementing in this process the all-important audit system that will verify that the votes were counted correctly and hopefully give even more confidence to people, and maybe we'll even have less recounts requested, because every time currently you fall in that 1%, you don't have always people ask for a recount, but that is the reason why we've modernized that standard. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the questions from the House, as I know there are several other speakers. I think what you have in front of you is a good bill that moves Georgia forward in our election law, and I'd ask you to favorably consider it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Now we begin the time limit, and the chair recognizes to speak to the bill Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise because I was asked to, and I'm going to nerd out on y'all. So if the eyes glaze over, I'll forgive you in advance, because I want to talk to you about the nature of risk limiting audits. I tried in my research to give you guys a readable document to explain what a risk limiting audit is and how it's done and what it means to do it. I put this on your desk. I killed several trees in an effort to do it. This is an article from the Christian Science Monitor. It's the part 3 of 3 that I put on your desk. I just want to point to you if you want to read along. It starts on page 8 of 16, and you can read that for yourself. But risk limiting audits, in my opinion, are the most important aspect of the voting process. We need to begin looking at our voting process as a system that's much wider than just election day. But for the activities that take place on election day, the risk limiting audit piece that's mentioned in here is going to give us the best chance at building confidence, rebuilding confidence, if you will, in our elections. The language specifically is in section 43, I believe, where we start talking about the definitions of the risk limiting audit. and that's on page 38 of the bill. Risk limiting audit is essentially it's an algorithm, if you will. It takes into account the margin of victory, the number of ballots cast, and what is called a confidence level. And what we call for in this bill is a 90% confidence level. The reason that is in there specifically is basically there's a 90% chance if there's some sort of attack, we're going to catch it. That's the minimum, though. It's not what we're set for. We're just saying that we want to see a risk limiting audit done that's going to give us a 90% chance at fixing whatever the errors may be. That's what, and so you take into account the margin of victory. So if there's a really big margin of victory, you need fewer votes. If you want to get to a 95, if this is in the article, if you want to get to a 95% confidence level, and there's a 4.5% margin of victory, you only need to count 131 votes to verify the result using that math. And so it's fast, it's cheap, and it's accurate. And so that's what risk limiting audits do. If there are any questions, Mr. Speaker, I hope I explained that well enough. And I know that there are a lot of folks, so I want to give them their opportunity, but I'll take questions if there are any.
You have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are you advocating for or against the bill?
You'll find out when the clerk locks the machine, sir.
Well, I need to know right now, Representative, because you spoke, the time was divided equally. And if you are an opponent of the bill, then I need to account for that. Okay, then I'm going to give 4 minutes back, or 3 minutes back to the proponents. Chair recognizes Representative Jasmine Clark to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Distinguished colleagues, I come to you today to speak about some major concerns I have with HB 316. For those of you who don't know much about me, let me start by explaining from which my concerns are born. I am a published scientist and lecturer and have a PhD from Emory University in microbiology. And while microbiology and voting machines are very different from each other, the method at which scientists seek knowledge, do research, apply statistics, and make conclusions is generally universal in the science community. My concerns about this bill come from a scientific perspective as I began to do my research. Based on this research, I have two major concerns. The first, touchscreen machines are actually not more accurate than hand marking a ballot. And secondly, ballot marking devices cannot produce meaningful audits. Along with being a scientist, I am also a millennial. I enjoy the conveniences of technology very much, and you can often find me walking the halls of the Capitol or the LOB with my phone or iPad in my hand. I am not anti-technology by any stretch of the imagination. I, however, understand the limitations of technology. While the sponsor of this bill says that touchscreens eliminate errors, our own experiences with the touchscreens can show the contrary. We all walk around with a touchscreen in our pockets every day. And we know that errors can happen. For instance, how many of you have ever sent a text message or emailed that looked great upon sending it, and you may have even checked over it to make sure it was perfect, and then when you receive the reply, you realize the person on the other end got a message that was not what you intended to send? It's all happened to us before. You typed mine instead of nine, or you typed H-E-R-E when you meant to type H-E-A-R? Or how many times have you been the victim of autocorrect? In each instance, whether it's user error or a technology error, your actual intent and what was transmitted are not the same. This scenario can be translated to the ballot box, where the voter may make an error while voting, or the touchscreen machine itself may be miscalibrated or compromised, creating an error. And the unfortunate reality is that many people would not either check or notice. A scientific study performed during an actual election showed that approximately half of voters do not check their ballots at all. The ones that do review their ballots often only do so for an average of 4 seconds for a ballot that had almost 20 races on it. That is not enough time to thoroughly check the ballot. But for those who are diligent enough to check, depending on how much is on the ballot or how long the ballot is, many may not notice a small error. This has actually been shown scientifically as well, where 63% of people surveyed after having just voted moments before could not notice an error on a ballot summary, and entire races could be removed, added, or changed without them realizing. All of this is confounded when you add in that the language in the bill allows ballot marking devices that use barcodes to tabulate the actual vote. This actually adds an extra layer of insecurity, since barcodes are changeable and hackable, and the voter could not be sure that what is on the summary is actually what was counted on the barcode scanner. Think of it this way. We've all been to the store where the price tag says one thing, and that is what we intend to pay. But when it's scanned at the register, it rings up for a different price. Barcodes can be easily hacked, and this has been demonstrated in multiple scientific studies. This brings me to my second concern, which is auditability. You may feel that many of these issues I just described can be addressed with audits. And Section 43 of the bill and Chairman Fleming and Representative Turner have just stated that the bill calls for the use of risk-limiting audits. Risk-limiting audits were developed by Dr. Philip Stark, the Associate Dean of Math and Physical Science and Professor of Statistics at UC Berkeley. He is considered a top expert in election audits. In his 2012 peer-reviewed paper that introduces risk-limiting audits, he explicitly states the best audit trails are voter-marked paper ballots, and voter-verified paper records are not as good because voters may not actually inspect them. Future studies, as I previously stated, would show the latter to be the case. In fact, no post-election audit can be performed using a system that doesn't have a reliable source document. Think of it this way. If you're filling out a form online and in your haste of typing, you misspell your street name on one of the pages, you hit save, print, and then send that form. You may have even looked it over before sending it, but still overlooked this very small error. The record will show that you intended to spell the street name the way you sent it. And so this misspelled street name would actually be audited as if it is the correct spelling. This is the flaw in having a ballot marking device as an intermediate step between voter intent and scanning the ballot. A mistake only has to happen a few times to change the outcome of an election. Dr. Stark wrote a letter to the subcommittee on voting rights that you all have on your desk, where he explains in that letter, remember, he developed this system. You cannot use printouts from ballot marking devices to conduct meaningful audits, and that this type of audit requires the use of hand-marked ballots. The inability to audit using the system outlined in the bill creates a conflict in the bill. Either we employ the ballot marking devices or we employ risk limiting audits. We cannot do both. It is not possible. To conclude, HB 316 has many good elements when it comes to voter protections, but falls short on voter security. It substitutes one unauditable system for another unauditable system. It calls for a voting system that goes against the advice of computer scientists, statisticians, election security experts, cybersecurity experts, post-election auditing experts, and more. Voter confidence and morale is at an all-time low on both sides of the aisle. This is not a partisan issue. We must restore trust by showing Georgians that we have done our homework and are committed to ensuring that their vote is counted as they intended and our elections are meaningfully audited. We owe that to our constituents. We owe it to vote no on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Chairman Blackman to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, fellow members. We have, over the last week, heard a great deal of testimony. We've received a lot of emails, gotten a lot of info, and I know we've all been listening as we should, as is our duty. And I think we're all after the same thing. We want safe, secure, fair elections. And I think we've received a great deal of information regarding facts, and we've also heard a lot of opinions, and we welcome both, of course. But in the study of this and looking at the security component that we've heard a great deal of objection about with regards to HB 316, I think it required a little bit more of investigation. And so one of the things that came up that I wanted to share with the body is a report by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And it focuses on the science, particularly of election security. And a committee met for a couple of years, is my understanding, and I wanted to delineate some of the committee members, which included computer science and cybersecurity experts, legal and election scholars, social scientists, and election officials. I'm going to skip their names and read the titles in the interest of time. The co-chair is President of Columbia University, New York City, President of Indiana University, Bloomington. Then we have the members, Eugene Higgins, Professor of Computer Science, Princeton University, Senior Cryptographer, Microsoft Research, Ray Lyman Wilbur, Professor of Sociology and Vice Provost for Faculty Development and Diversity and Director, Institute for Research in the Social Sciences, Stanford University, Travis County Clerk, County of Travis, Austin, Texas, Associate Professor, Department of Mathematics and Founding Director, Program in Science, Technology, and Society, Tufts University, Medford, Massachusetts, Andrew Banks Family Preeminence Endowed Professor and Chair, Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering, University of Florida, Gainesville Pyong Chen, Distinguished Professor Emeritus, Computer Science Division, Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences, University of California, Berkeley, Registrar of Voters, County of Orange, Santa Ana, California, Director, General Counsel, Wisconsin Government Accountability Board, Madison, James McClatchy, Professor of Law, Stanford Law School, Institute Professor, Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge, and the Distinguished Professor of Political Science of MIT, Cambridge, is a Keenan Sahin professor. What I would really like to share, it has several primary suggestions that come out of this committee. The one I would like to focus on, and I would also say that when queried up against all of these recommendations, House Bill 316 passes on all accounts. But this is part of the recommendations that elections, and I'm going to read this from what I have, Elections should be conducted with human-readable paper ballots. Paper ballots form a body of evidence that is not subject to manipulation by faulty software or hardware that can be used to audit and verify the results of an election. Human-readable paper ballots may be marked by hand or by machine using a ballot marking device. I'll read that again. Human-readable paper ballots may be marked by hand or by machine using a ballot marking device, and they may be counted by hand or by machine using an optical scanner. The report says voters should have the opportunity to review and confirm their selections before depositing the ballot for tabulation. Once again, this is part of several recommendations of which House Bill 316 does pass that test. I will be at my desk and be happy to share any links or copies of this information that anybody is interested, and I'll be happy to try to answer a couple of questions should there be any.
You have a couple of questions if you care to yield.
We'll certainly yield for a couple of questions, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman Dollar to your left for a question. He waves off. Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that you listed a number of the individuals who might have been placed on our desk today?
I really don't know about the same individuals as regards to what was placed on the desk.
Thank you. Is it not further true that the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, as well as the Verified Voting Foundation, have an advocate here who is on our desk who has advocated for hand-marked paper ballots?
I'm sure the lady knows of what she speaks. I can only really speak to the report that I'm quoting from at this point. And again, it is a very thorough, over 100 pages. That's why we didn't make copies and put them on your desk. But I would encourage you to take a look at that study and formulate your opinions therein. Thank you, ma'am.
No further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Chair recognizes Representative Alexander to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition of HB 316. I want to take you guys down memory lane. In 2018 general election, there were 6.9 million people registered to vote in Georgia. 2.6 people early voted. 230,000 absentee ballots were mailed. Of those, around 5,000 rejected on policy decisions by county officials. A total of 53,000 voter registrations were held due to discrepancies in applicants and governmental records. Examples are hyphens, missing hyphens, and typos. 22,000 provisional ballots were cast, while some counties did not have enough provisional ballots to provide to the voters. I have 2 counties, and in one of my counties, that was the issue. There were over 17,000 complaints on voting issues. Long lines with 3-hour wait times, some 4, while 1,800 machines sat idle in predominantly Democratic counties. In my 19 years as an internal auditor, I have worked for several large Fortune 500 companies, including the Coca-Cola Company. I was astonished by so many voting irregularities in the 2018 election. I began drafting legislation to address and correct some of those issues. As legislators, we should want to ensure that no citizen of Georgia is excluded from voting if they have that legitimate right to vote. In fact, this body should be working to make it easier to vote than more difficult. In drafting the legislation, I solicited input from local election officials and citizens of Georgia. The end result was HB 248, 249, 250, and 251, all thoroughly drafted to include corrective measures based on the voter issues. Some of the corrective measures were pending application and voter verification, timely notices of absentee ballots, three-way verification for absentee ballot rejections, and voter assistance for the disabled. All bills included the safeguards to address issues from the 2018 election. Ladies and gentlemen, portions of each one of these bills were haphazardly cut and pasted in HB 316, removing the context of each bill in order to guise that HB 316 is bipartisan bill. Several amendments were offered to the author, but to no avail. Due to the extensive voting issues which plagued the 2018 elections, all voting issues should be addressed in a standalone bill with standalone fixes, not crammed into one bill with voting machine equipment attached. Georgians deserve better. HB 316 indicates risk-limiting auditing. Now, I know we talked a little bit about that, but I'm going to try to simplify it. Risk-limiting audits confirms that a voting machine is recording and tallying correctly. And depending on what that risk may be, if you want to take 10%, 90%, a sample of 10% would be counted by taking voters cast and comparing the votes recorded in a system memory. The voting equipment used in HB 316 are all electronic machines with no paper trail. In audit, we call the paper trail our source document. Therefore, risk-limiting auditing is more effective and efficient when voting equipment leaves a paper trail. Voting equipment with hand-marked paper ballots leave a paper trail. I reiterate, HB 316 does not include voting equipment with hand-marked paper ballots, cybersecurity, upgrades, maintenance of the equipment, or a physical note. Where's the physical note on the equipment? Pending lawsuits question the integrity of the state's electronic voting machines and voting processes. We have an opportunity and responsibility to bring back that trust to elections in Georgia. It has been said that the hallmark of a democracy is the peaceful transition of power. How can this occur if the citizens don't trust the process of choosing its leaders? HB 316 is over 40 pages and does not rectify voter issues in detail resulting from the 2018 elections. Instead, this bill leaves me raising concerns to follow the money for this expensive purchase on the backs of the taxpayers. I ask that we oppose HB 316, and Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Lady has yielded the well. The chair recognizes Representative Todd Jones to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to change the tone here a little bit. The fact of the matter is we stand on the precipice, I think, of greatness in so many different ways. We talk so much in this chamber about how we're doing in business, how we have such low unemployment, how we're able to provide full QBE to education. But one of the things we don't talk enough about in this chamber, voter participation. The fact of the matter is the data does not lie. We know that between 2014 and 2018, we know that voter registrations are up 1.25 million. In 2018, during the gubernatorial election, we had over 3.9 million people vote. That's equal to the presidential election in 2016 and the most voter participation we've ever had in our great state of Georgia. When you start looking at all the data around minority participation, I think the picture becomes clear. Between 2014 and 2018, Hispanic American voter registration is up about 65%. Hispanic American voter participation is up over 220%. African American voter registration is up 15%, but more importantly, African American voter participation is up over 50%. The fact of the matter is we are trending in the right direction. Since we started in 2016 providing for automatic registration in this state when you sign up for a driver's license, we've seen the results of that. Several bona fide third-party entities have talked about our success in being able to pick up registrations, both for women and for minorities. Now, I'm not here to say we're perfect. The fact of the matter is we're not. I know each of us have stories from our constituents where we could have done better. But the fact of the matter is we can't deny that over the last 4 years, we have improved remarkably. And for us to deny that, frankly, I believe it's a disrespect to this institution and to our constituents. Let's take a victory lap sometimes, but understand a victory lap does not mean we won the war, but rather we won the battle. The last thing I want to touch on is inclusivity. We talk a lot about how is it that we get those who are most harmed, those who are frankly infirmed, those who are ill, those who are not as fortunate. I believe each and every one of us is committed to that. This bill permits that. The fact is, by a common user interface, it doesn't matter if you are an able-bodied citizen, if you are an individual who's hard of hearing, who needs larger text, in Gwinnett County, who needs multilingual assistance. Or how about that individual who's handicapped with Parkinson's? The fact of the matter is, a common user interface allows them to be able to vote one common way. It does not segment or segregate individuals from one particular system to another particular system just by their ability or their lack of an ability to do that. I hope that as you reflect on HB 316, I hope that you start thinking about where we've come from 2014. Let's think about the progress that we made, but most importantly, let's think about where we can go to together. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Park to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, I dropped the little thing. Colleagues, I rise in opposition to House Bill 316, and I urge each of you to vote no. If this bill passes, all elections in Georgia will be conducted on electronic voting machines that are more expensive and less secure than hand-marked paper ballots over the next 10 years, at the very least. These voting machines will end up costing Georgia taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars over the next decade. The initial cost of these machines will be around $150 million. Annual maintenance, logistics, and repair costs are estimated to exceed an additional $200 million over the next decade. Further, there are unfunded mandates on local government for the operation and storage of these machines. Not only is there no fiscal note on this bill, no one, not even ACCG, has been able to provide an estimate of these long-term costs. Specifically, lines 608 to 610 require cities and counties to pay custodians and their deputies for the setup and use of machines in every election. Line 631 requires election superintendents to pay for the safe storage and care of these machines. Hand-marked paper ballots, on the other hand, would initially cost $35 to $50 million. The long-term maintenance and operation costs are estimated to be $15 million cheaper than these machines, which would immediately begin to depreciate once obtained. The memo from the Secretary of State put on members' desks today estimate that hand-marked paper ballots would cost up to $224 million over a decade. These new voting machines will cost nearly twice as much, or $400 to $500 million over the same period of time. It is blatantly misleading to compare 10 years of costs for handmade paper ballots to the initial cost of purchasing these machines. Now, I would be open to spending an additional $100 million for state-of-the-art election technology that was secure. However, that is not what we're doing here. We are paying hundreds of millions of dollars more for a system that has pervasive security vulnerabilities according to the National Security of Sciences, and cybersecurity and election security experts from around the country. In deciding how we will conduct our elections over the next decade, security must be our highest priority. Without security, there is no integrity and the validity of our elections, which will further erode public confidence in our democratic process. Colleagues, we are at a crossroads. Either we will take a step in restoring public confidence in our elections by using hand-marked paper ballots, which is what experts have repeatedly recommended as the safest, most cost-effective method in which we may conduct our elections, or we will further undermine the public's trust in our elected officials and our democracy. So the question I pose to members of this body is, why are we voting for a system that is far more expensive and far less secure? Georgia deserves better, and the people demand it. I urge each of y'all to vote no on House Bill 316. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Gullett to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank everyone who's been engaged in this effort, from Chairman Fleming to the SAFE Commission, to the activists and constituents who have reached out concerning this bill, to the Government Affairs Committee, to the people who offered amendments to make this bill better. Thank you. I think that we all agree that elections have been the usual mechanism by which modern representative democracy has operated since the 17th century. And I think we can all also agree and appreciate the amount of debate that has occurred in regards to this bill. I'm standing before you today not as a Republican legislator, but as someone with a computer science background. My job outside of serving the great people of District 19 is working as a technology professional for a bank. I've been there my entire professional life, where I started while I was in college studying computer science. I've been a programmer, a data analyst, a systems and risk analyst, a technical lead, and an architect. I haven't done it all, but I've done a lot. I'm standing before you today not as a Republican legislator, but as someone experienced in the realities of elections. Before running for public office, I had the honor of serving the Paulding County Board of Elections as an appointee of the state legislative delegation. It was a lot of hard work, and we had a lot of responsibility. I say that because our Board of Elections is a legal entity and authority over the elections in Paulding County. On this board, I worked many elections. I audited many precincts. I talked to many poll managers and even more poll workers. I've helped register voters. I've helped open elections. I've closed down election machines at the end of a long election day. I've opened thousands of absentee ballots. I've even certified elections. I've literally experienced elections from the inside. As a technology professional and former Board of Elections member, I can speak from experience that we must update and replace our current voting machines. I can speak from experience in saying that we must select a system which best protects our election integrity by guaranteeing both safe elections and accurate vote counts. I can speak from experience in saying we must have the ability to conduct post-election audits. I can speak from experience that we must have a system that is easy to use for all voters, including those with vision, mobility, and other disabilities. I can speak from experience that the touchscreen ballot markers are the only solution which meets these must-haves for Georgia in our future. It's the only solution that strikes a common sense balance between security, accessibility, and transparency. It's the only solution that doesn't put an unfunded mandate on our local counties. It's the only solution that will provide continuity with our current touchscreens that Georgia's voters have used for nearly 20 years. It's the only solution that leaves absolutely no room for doubt of voter intent, since the voters make a clear choice with the press of a button. This is a measure that is overwhelmingly supported by 94% of our election board supervisors. Many of them are here today. These are the folks that are in the belly of the beast, so to speak. Most have spent a majority of their careers being public servants in our communities, and I appreciate and respect the jobs that they do. I'm standing before you today not as a Republican legislator, but as someone with a computer science background and as someone experienced in the realities of elections, and I urge your favorable consideration of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Wynn to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We spent a lot of time debating the merits of hand-marked paper ballots versus touchscreen ballot markers, and while I unequivocally support hand-marked paper ballots, I don't want us to lose sight of House Bill 316 in its entirety. The provisions in this bill are in part the reasons why we saw 500,000 voters purged from the rolls in 2017, 55,000 voters applications placed in pending status, thousands of absentee ballots rejected due to mismatched signatures, and over 21,000 voters who were forced to use provisional ballots in our most recent statewide elections. It would also be a disservice to our state if I did not mention that these policies disproportionately impact voters of color. We need to look at this bill in its entirety because every part of this bill is critical to ensuring ballot access and election fairness. We've made some important changes to this bill, but I want to be clear that these changes are the direct result of costly and timely litigation, and they don't go far enough to ensure we protect our most vulnerable voters or shield us from further lawsuits. I'd like to focus on two parts of this bill that are still vulnerable to legal challenges. Section 31 and 35 deal with voting assistance at the polls, and these sections update the codes to be consistent with federal law. These changes were a direct result of litigation that challenged our state for being more restrictive than federal law about who can assist voters with limited English proficiency and voters with disabilities. In its current form, even with the changes, the bill neither aligns with federal law nor adheres to the court order, which already costs taxpayers $35,000 in attorney's fees. The federal law plainly provides that anybody can assist these voters at the poll with two exceptions: the voter's employer or an officer or agent of the voters' union. Sections 31 and 35 violate this by imposing additional restrictions, and these restrictions need to be removed entirely, and this is not my opinion. Section 39 addresses the way in which we handle provisional ballots. The changes do not provide for uniformity, accuracy, or transparency, and they do not instill trust or voter confidence. I've placed on your desk examples of provisional forms used in 2018 from 3 different counties: Gwinnett, DeKalb, and Forsyth, and you can see the information provided in each county varies. That's why we need standardized recording processes and consistent codes for all 159 counties that can be verified by voters and accessed through public notices at polling locations and online. We have the duty to do the responsible thing as lawmakers, and part of that duty is to exercise sound judgment when it comes to passing law. This includes our legal accountability, and we must be good stewards of this accountability and be considerate of the legal challenges stemming from our decisions, which is why I cannot in good faith support House Bill 316. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Mr. Clerk, Chair would like for you to read Rule 8.1, please, of the House Rules.
Rule 8.1. Applause, hisses, or other noise in the House chamber, in the gallery, or in the lobbies during any speech or legislative proceeding shall be promptly suppressed. Placards, displays, banners, and signs are prohibited and shall be removed promptly.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Rick Williams to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, come before you today
to talk about House Bill 316. In 1989, I was asked by the Chief Judge of the Okmulgee Circuit to serve as the Chief Registrar of Baldwin County. I served with a lot of the people who are up in the gallery today. I know those people not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but as professionals who do a nonpartisan job. They are committed. They're some of the most dedicated people I've ever known and had the pleasure to work with. I have watched on election night a ballot review committee. This is 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, appointed by the election superintendent to interpret a paper ballot. This paper ballot was a mailed-in ballot, absentee ballot, that the elector had scribbled on. I've seen them mark through a name. I've seen them erase a name, try to erase a name, and I've seen other names written in, such as Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse. I've seen people do all kinds of things with ballots, and you tell them this is the rule, and they still don't follow the rule. Now, I heard someone speak just a moment ago about typing in names. What happens is these voting machines, you're not going to be typing in a name. The name's already going to be programmed in. The candidates are going to be in there already. You know, I started under Secretary of State Lewis Massey. We had the big shoot machines. Those things were big as a refrigerator. Then I was serving with under Kathy Cox. And I came to all of her hearings when she went after the DRE. A lot of us election supervisors, election officials were very hesitant about those machines, but we embraced them because of the technology. Every one of you have an iPhone today. Every one of you depend on that iPhone. As Chairman Fleming said, and I sat through all the hearing listening. Not once has anyone talked about the ballot reading device. All you can talk about is a ballot marking device. Well, there's another device that's going to read that ballot. That's the one that's the most dangerous. Yeah, I'm for election integrity, and I will fight for election integrity. For 16 years, I was neither a Republican nor a Democrat. And so when I ran, people were asking me, so you finally decided what you are? Well, I guess so. But what I did do for 16 years, I fought for fair elections and just elections. I believe House Bill 316 addresses that. I have confidence in that. And I know that spending $150 million on this equipment does not equal what it's going to cost the county to print ballots. For provisional ballots, for election day ballots, they've got to have 80% and anticipate at least 80% voter turnout, because everyone that shows up to vote on election day is entitled to a ballot. You cannot be short a ballot. There's going to be so much printing. I just feel like this is the way to go. I'm convinced it is. I know the technology is accurate, and I asked everyone to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Lopez to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak more generally on the concerns and issues of this bill, because the question before us is, will my vote count? And the question in 2020 elections will be, did you advocate for my vote to count? And that is why I urge you to vote no on HB 316. The alternative is the price of the integrity and faith in the voting system. This bill before you is not a bipartisan effort. This bill before you is not a bill about voter protection. As stated before, simply co-opting Representative Alexander's bills only concedes that former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams was correct. There is a systematic breakdown in our voting system and access to voting. However, those issues should be resolved by moving independently with Representative Alexander's bills. This bill before you, however, is about voting machines lobbied by vendors. This bill, in fact, has been written for an RFP that eliminates vendors that provide hand-marked paper ballots. And I will refer you on your desk to the New Yorker article that details specifically how the lobby and vendors have been intermingling with some of our election officials. And you can read that at your pleasure. However, voters, citizen advocates, and your constituents have lobbied for a voting system that gives them trust that when they cast their ballot, their intentions are actually recorded. Those election integrity advocates favor hand-marked paper ballots because it most closely reflects voters' intentions. And this bill before you is also about security or lack thereof to ensure that we do have a system that cannot be tampered with or manipulated, and that begins by requiring systems to accurately reflect that voter's intention and not that of a electronic machine. This bill before you is also about functionality. But here we have a bill that is about electronic machines that do in fact print paper ballots, which may or may not be legible and human readable, as was mentioned through a barcode. Despite recommendations, as we heard from various cybersecurity experts, including our local cybersecurity expert, Richard DeMillo and Winky Lee from Georgia Tech's Information Security Center. Furthermore, just to clarify, according to Verified Voting, an elections integrity organization, more than 70% of US voters nationwide in fact use paper ballots. And here we also have before you in this bill an issue of fiscal responsibility for accepting voting machine recommendations from those who profit from those recommendations and go against voter demands and cybersecurity experts. The state's current voting machine vendor, for example, in fact, 5 out of the 6 companies that showed products to the Safe Commission demonstrated only ballot marking devices. And I also will ask you, I am on the beginning end of the millennials, but I like technology as much as the rest, the next millennial, but I will read from the New Yorker, and I will conclude with that last September, federal judge in the Northern District denied the plaintiff's request to compel the state to use paper ballots on the simple grounds that it was too close to the election. However, the judge warned that advanced persistent threats to this data-driven world and ordinary hacking are unfortunately here to stay. Defendants have failed to address the realities that they demean as paranoid of the research-based findings of national security engineers and experts in the field of elections, nor will surface-level audit procedures address this reality when viruses and malware alters data and results or evades suppression or detection. To be clear, voter confidence, has been stated, is not a partisan issue. And I simply will remind you that convenience is not the standard to safeguard our constitutional rights, least but not all, our sacred right to vote. Therefore, I cannot in good conscience vote for this bill, and I urge you to vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the Speaker Pro Tem of the House, Speaker Pro Tem Jones, to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon, members. I do want to comment for just a moment on a little more, since it's already been commented on the method voters will cast their ballots as contemplated in House Bill 316. As you know, the legislation calls for ballot marking devices, not voting machines, not direct voting machines as we have utilized since 2002, and not hand-marked paper ballots. I want to compare the process for these two different ways and the similarities in their computer interface and audit trails. The prospect of cyber compromise would remain most probable at the points in the process that the two methods share. Both utilize human readable marks, otherwise known as words, and this information would be present in both methods of ballot marking. In both cases, a voter hand fills out a card, presents it to a poll worker who confirms the voter in an electronic poll book as utilized today. The data contained in the electronic poll book would have been collated via a computer interface and earlier uploaded onto a memory card for access by electronic poll books at each of the 2,365 precincts. On the one hand, with touch-screen ballot markers, the poll worker provides a voter with a memory card containing precinct ballot information to insert into one of the machines, each one of which are designed to produce a paper ballot, not electronically record a vote. After utilizing the machine marking device to make ballot choices, a paper ballot is printed, whereby the voter confirms his or her selections through human-readable words, human-readable words printed on the ballot. The ballot, as has been pointed out, may possibly contain non-human readable marks called a barcode if such machines are selected by the Secretary of State office. If it does, the human readable words provide a check and balance for an audit trail because there are two different sets of data. On the other hand, now let me talk for a moment about hand-marked ballots. A poll worker hands the voter a paper ballot printed in his or her language, if more than one language is offered according to census data and required by the Justice Department. As Georgia becomes richer in its human diversity, the variety of languages on ballots will increase. Gwinnett now offers English and Spanish. The complexity of ballot provision is increased with hand-marked paper ballots because on the other type in the machine, it automatically can reveal the language that is the voter requires. After bubbling in ovals, the voter hands the ballot containing human readable words, but it also contains non-human readable marks, otherwise called bubbled in ovals, to the poll worker who scans in the ballot. Now, for those who are concerned about cybersecurity, I do want to be transparent. A traditional hand-marked paper ballot is coordinate-based. There are coordinate lines all around the perimeter of the ballot. It is essentially a barcode surrounding the ballot, telling the scanner where to read and how to interpret the ballot. But for those concerned about these non-readable marks on a hand-marked ballot, the human readable words provide a check and balance. They provide an audit trail to the non-human readable marks, otherwise known as bubbled in ovals, because there are two sets of data, one of which is human readable words. If it sounds repetitive to the other process, it's because it is. From this point forward, the process is essentially identical. The scanners in both cases tabulate precinct info, take pictures of all ballots, and the paper ballots are retained separately. If this bill passes, the 25,000 future ballot marking machines would be unlinked to one another and act as a computerized pen, making uniform marks and producing a printed paper ballot. They are, as has been mentioned, fully accessible to every voter and can accommodate different languages and font sizes. They mimic the current voter experience, but they just mimic it because they are not voting machines. They give complete clarity as to voter intent, which results in a smoother, faster process. there would rarely be spoiled ballots, unlike hand-marked ballots, which greatly introduce human error. County election staff throughout Georgia overwhelmingly prefer machine-marked ballots, and regardless of whether they work in Democrat or Republican-leaning voting counties. Given the similarities in the voting process, as well as similarities in the potential for cyber hacking and audit trails, this particular aspect of House Bill 316 has no business being touted as partisan. We can differ on preference, but we should not differ on motivation. I do caution those who would stoke the fears of voters and jeopardize their trust in our democratic process. Our voters rely on us to give them actual, real information and vote on their behalf in this chamber, not cynical hyperbole. And I do tell my friends here throughout this, both sides of the aisle, we are stronger as a state when we do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the chair of the Minority Caucus, Chairman Beverly, to speak to the bill. Mr. Chairman, you have 5.5 of the 30 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Secure, accessible, fair elections. In April of 2018, a group of us got together under the behest of the Secretary of State to form a group with the laudable goal of making sure that we report back to the General Assembly what we found as a part of this commission so that we can make a decision about voting machines moving into the future. There was one cybersecurity expert on that panel, Dr. Winky Leak, who said irrefutably, the only way to make sure that there is no cybersecurity attack is to make sure that we have hand-marked paper ballots. We debated it, 4 meetings. We reviewed it. We argued about it. But at the end of the day, there was only one thing that one cybersecurity expert agreed on, and that is that hand-marked paper ballots were the gold standard for how we do elections. A hand-marked paper ballot. When I first started voting in the 80s, there was a such thing as these bubble ballots. There were no optical scanners, there were no iPhones, there were no iPads. There was nothing to tell the elector whether your vote was good or bad. You would mark your ballot, you would put it in a machine, or you would have a thing that you would put in and you would touch something and all of a sudden your ballot would come out and it was cast. Today what we're talking about are these hand-marked paper ballots are, you do a ballot marking device. It goes into an optical scanner, it drops into a lockbox. The optical scanner can read information from 2-point tactile, almost pressure and vibratory sense, the way that these ballot marks look on the ballot. It can pick up any stray. It's not like my eye can pick that up. These ballot marking devices and these optical scanners can actually pick up stray marks. So it's not the same ballots that we had in the 80s. If I wanted to vote for James Beverly, James Beverly, Barry Fleming, Speaker Ralston. And I would slide this into an optical scanner, it would drop into a lockbox. There's no middleman in the picture. The reason why ballot marking devices today are in play is because I like to call those ballot money devices. It's a honeypot. It's a way to incentivize vendors to push the game down the road. We don't need ballot marking devices when we have pens and paper that can go into optical scanners, drop into a ballot box, and can be read in an audit. I would encourage us to think truly about how we vote on this bill. In a state where we claim to be fiscally conservative and the #1 state to do business, now's the time for us to act like it. $30 million as opposed to $150 million. And the ongoing concern is far less in the future than it is today. And if we decide to go with these ballot marking devices, let me put this on your heart. Please, please consider leasing these because the next 10 years is important to our future. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell to speak to the bill. And I didn't make this up, but you have 5.5 minutes also.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to do the best that I can to speak in 5.5 minutes, maybe a little bit shorter, maybe little bit longer. But either way about it, I'm sure the Speaker will cut me off whenever he's ready.
Now let me clarify that. It will not be longer.
Yes, sir. I understand. You know, I want to start out first by thanking a lot of folks. I want to thank the subcommittee members on the Election Subcommittee of Governmental Affairs for what they endured through testimony. I want to thank the people who testified, because I have no doubt that a lot of those folks, they absolutely believed each and everything that they said. I want to thank the members of this General Assembly in here today. Gosh, this has been one of the most civil debates that I've ever heard. I miss the old days when we used to shake our fist at each other. But I want to tell you, this has been so civil that what this tells me that this ain't nothing but a partisan fight. You know, I'll give you a little history. I was here when we did the first voting bills, and I chaired it. I think I was chairing governmental affairs at that time, around 2000 or 01, and I wasn't in favor of the machines. And I wasn't in favor of them because I didn't trust them. I thought that those kind of machines was kind of hicky. And I came from that day when one of my counties used to have the old lever machines, and another one used to have the punch machines, and the other one and part of the precincts filled out paper ballots. And I felt very uneasy because I said, gosh, somebody this internet technology can go in there and they could fix the elections with those VRIs or whatever you call those things. But surprisingly enough, over the years, the only thing happened was they got antiquated. There was no reports of anybody ever fixing the election. And for those of y'all who've not used to that term, fixing elections, I can tell you about the process of running an election. When I ran my first campaign in 1976, I got beat by 12 votes. And that was when they used to mark hand ballots. And if somebody, an older person or somebody, get in there and they'd scratch a hole in that one because they didn't like that one, or a frog crawled up the leg and they'd scratch the other one, they'd go back and mark another one, then it was left up to the desires and the wishes of the polling officials to decide, how did this person really want to vote? I remember the absentee system. I was a young man at that time, and I wasn't near smart enough to know to get to that nursing home and block them absentee ballots for them poor old folks who didn't no more know if they was voting for me than they was their pet cheetah. But that's the system, ladies and gentlemen. And we didn't have any problems with those vote machines that everybody just fell all over themselves for in 2001. Now we've come up with a new day, and I look out here at all you technology folks. I listened with a good bit of interest to folks. I heard Mr. Turner, and I heard his technology. We got so many techno folks in here, I know how ignorant that I really am. I heard Mr. Turner. I had a little story I was going to tell, and I may not have time, thanks to Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Turner made an observation about me the other day. We were riding around one night after dinner, and I had a carload of folks, and I kept trying to find a night deposit for a bank here in town. We stopped by 3 or 4 places. The other day, Mr. Turner was pointing out, he said, you see that ignorant old fellow over there? He's the last man in America that uses a night deposit. Well, I am, because I put a whole lot more faith in a night deposit with my money than I do with technology. But I will tell you, what you've heard described here today is the voting process. It is paper ballots, the very thing that the minority wants. The minority party wanted that ballot. All it does, it scans them through a machine to let the machine vote them. You pull that ballot out, you check it to be sure that's how you want it voted, you scan it, and it puts that document in a locked box for audit and for the purposes of having a recount. Ladies and gentlemen, if you hadn't realized what this haranguing and the debate's about, it's partisanship. And it goes back to the 2016 elections. A lot of folks never got over the fact when the wrong one won the presidency, and he wasn't expected to by either political party. And then it got to a situation that they were looking for the 2020 elections. And the Democrats, they had a very astute and a brilliant candidate that run. And she did such a good job that she mobilized the votes behind her and pointed the finger at the now governor who was in Secretary of State. But let me just give you this for instance. During the hearings, I listened to all of the testimony, and I heard the word voter suppression, and I heard the word disenfranchisement to the point that I finally couldn't stand it anymore. Because let me tell you something. Any suppression, and this is what a lot of people never got, the Elections Division is administratively attached to the Secretary of State's office, but the actual voting procedures is handled by the county boards of elections. And when I keep hearing the word voter suppression and disenfranchisement, all of this stuff, it's interesting to me that it happened mostly in the base counties of the Democratic base by their people on election night.
Gentlemen, you need to wrap it up in about 5 seconds.
Yes,
You've
sir.
already gone over your time.
On election night, I had concerns when I learned that a judge out here in the metro area had extended the voting hours from 7 to 10 o'clock. And to me, that was disenfranchisement of my voters who did it right. And they did it because they said that somebody didn't bring the power cords for a few hours to the machines.
Gentleman's
Ladies and
time
gentlemen,
has
whose
expired.
fault is that? Folks,
Gentleman's time has
I
expired.
appreciate your consideration for House Bill 613, and I would encourage you to know that when this bid goes out, that you'll be seeing these ballots and you will have verification. I apologize.
You're not
I'm
recognized
dyslexic.
in the well.
613. 316.
Okay. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered on House Bill 316? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. We're going on now to the minority report under the rules of the House. 20 minutes are in total allocated to the minority report, and the chair recognizes Representative Shannon to give the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to read you some testimony. Normally, I just vote my ballot and then just trust the machine to record my selections accurately. After all, these machines should work, or else we wouldn't be voting on them year after year. But on this day, when I went to cast my votes, I had a few extra minutes and decided to actually double check each of my choices on the confirmation page before leaving the booth. I saw something alarming. I saw that my choice for county sheriff had been inaccurately recorded. So I went back to the original screen where I had marked my choice for sheriff and again marked my correct intended choice. And again, the ballot reflected a choice different than my intention. Now very frustrated, for the third time, I marked my choice for sheriff, and again, the ballot reflected a choice different than my intention. This is a testimony of our very own colleague from the House District 63. telling us what she experienced while trying to vote in this past November 2018 general election. She is not alone, and with every election, we hear of Georgians from both political parties experiencing vote flipping. And the system being proposed here will have the same vulnerabilities as our current machines. To some, it may seem archaic to ask for hand-marked paper ballots, but to voters who have experienced vote flipping or don't trust that electronic votes aren't being tampered with, hand-marked paper ballots are the only way to recapture the public's trust that their vote will be accurately reflected. Hand-marked paper ballots never flip or mysteriously lose your vote. Georgians know this, and that's why 55% of Georgians said in a recent poll that they want hand-marked paper ballots. Now, the author of this bill said in committee that voters had full confidence in the system until the former minority leader Stacey Abrams' gubernatorial campaign gave voters a reason to doubt. It is almost as if he was implying that she had worked some type of magic in the minds of voters. Well, the only magic being deployed here is the magic of actually listening to the concerns of voters across this state and security experts who have said ballot marking devices are not secure election technology. The author of this bill has stated many things that are just not true, and in fact, when the facts easily dispute what he is saying, those facts can easily be found. The author states currently about 24 states use this modern touchscreen marked paper ballot system primarily due to the fairly obvious advantages to voter accuracy and ballot accessibility. The fact is, only a handful of counties in those 24 states use these BMDs as a primary voting method. The vast majority of BMDs used in these 24 states are used specifically for assistive devices for disabled voters. The author would also have you to believe that reverting back to any other form of the voting system, including a pencil-marked ballot, could easily force our state into a situation that we don't want to recall, like Florida in 2000, where they had so much trouble there. With a pencil-marked ballot, election officials, attorneys, and partisan vote reviewers had to interpret stray and accidental pencil marks on an improperly complete and completed ballots, meaning that the voter may have their vote counted incorrectly or completely invalidated. Florida's problems were with butterfly punch ballots, not pencil hand-marked paper ballots. No state is using pencils in elections anywhere. And I actually lived in Florida at the time that this election occurred, and I voted in that very election in 2000. In fact, it was my first election that I was old enough to vote in, so I really remember vividly what happened in my home state. The extremely poor layout of the ballot is what led to some voters creating hanging chads, where which are basically half punch holes that raise discrepancies about the voter's true intention. Some voters were unsure if they were punching the right hole for the candidate of their choice, and so they partially punched other holes before realizing that the hole didn't actually align with the candidate they were trying to vote for. And that's what actually happened in Florida. Poor layout of any ballot used in any voting system, electronic or paper, will wreak havoc on any election. And here's a picture of the misleading ballot on the screen. The author states touchscreen ballot markers will print a paper ballot with an exact copy of the voter's digital selections. After reviewing the paper ballot for accuracy, the voter will submit their paper ballot to be scanned and counted. Here's the facts. Years of repeated research have proven that the majority of voters do not review the ballot for accuracy or detect irregularities reflected on the printed vote record, whether it was user error or machine programming. This means that the election results cannot be audited. Now let's have a conversation about values. Security experts agree that hand-marked paper ballots are still the gold standard for election security and the ability to audit, even in a world that uses technology for everything. Republicans have marketed themselves for decades as a party of fiscal responsibility and security. I'm not conceding that they were ever the only party that cared about fiscal responsibility and security, but that's how they've marketed themselves to voters. Well, this bill doesn't even have a fiscal note. Yep, Republicans are asking us to approve this bill and thereby approve a blank check for a system that most will say will cost more than paper ballots. This reminds me of 2 years ago when Republicans in this House passed a statewide tax break, and we didn't even receive the fiscal note until several weeks after the bill had already passed on the floor. Why are Republicans now pushing to spend more taxpayer money on an inferior system, speaking from a security perspective, against all expert advice, when there is a drastically cheaper solution that is more secure? Republicans, what would you like to tell voters is the answer to this question? You want to tell them that your party's values have changed? Or to be more succinct, new party, who dis? Between pushing for Medicaid waivers, which will cost more and cover less people, to now pushing to spend more of taxpayer money for less security in a new voting system, I'm starting to think the theme of this legislative session is Republicans go out of their way to waste taxpayer money in the face of all common sense. Moving forward with ballot marking devices instead of hand-marked paper ballots will be an expensive mistake that the majority of Georgians will not soon forget, and is sure to have electoral consequences. And so the question begs an answer. Who is this purchase really for? Vendors or for Georgia's voters? Normally, I would take questions, but because we are limited on debate, I won't take questions today, and I yield the next 6 minutes of the minority report to Representative Mary Margaret Oliver.
Chair the lady has yielded a portion of her minority report time to Representative Oliver, who is recognized to speak to the minority report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of you are students of history, far more than I am, and I learn from you and I enjoy the history lessons that I receive on this House floor. One of the books that I recommend to people to Georgia that tells us a lot about Georgia is President Jimmy Carter's book, Turning Point, about his first election to the state Senate in 1963. Jimmy Carter's first political position was, as appointed by the grand jury, not elected under Georgia's Constitution, was to the school board, where he took members of the school board to the 27 different sites, houses, gyms, sort of schoolhouses, where the African-American children went to school. But Baker v. Carr was issued by the United States Supreme Court in 1963, which eliminated the county unit system, and Jimmy Carter had a chance to run for state senate. And Turning Point is about that election, obviously unusual and obviously short and obviously highly contested, as a fundamental change of Georgia came about. The story is about elections. Those of us, all of you have won one election. Some of you may have lost elections. The Speaker and I had the unhappy event of losing a statewide election. And in these election following events, you go and you think and you look at what happened. You look to see where the ballots were. And in the days of Jimmy Carter's Senate election in 1963, the Quitman County probate judge had a very important role. He wouldn't release the ballots. He may have submitted them at some point in alphabetical order, but the litigation where Jimmy Carter met Charlie Curbo and Griffin Bell was fascinating about the change of Georgia's history. I came to this debate thinking about ballot shenanigans, thinking not about a cheetah or a frog up the leg, but thinking about the criminal activities of Dodge County, where ballots were misused, thinking about the rained-on ballots in some county that obviously disappeared based allegedly on non-readability, and I was skeptical. But I have come to the point through this debate and my own education of learning where we are in technology today is not where Jimmy Carter was, not where the Quitman County probate judge was. And the issues of mismarking, the issues of circling, the issues of allegedly hanging chads, or the fictional pencil vote are all things of the past, and we have to look forward. There are two things that I care about that I want to share with you. One, what do people want? And two, this is my nerdiness, what is the federal court going to do with our voting activities? Everywhere I go in my district, not activists, apolitical people, not people who are members of change.org, not people who are activists on the Stacey Abrams campaign, but whether it's the CVS, the dog park, or my book club, somebody wants to talk to me about how their ballot was messed with in 2018. They want to show me one of these absentee ballots, they want to talk about the screen, and they tell me, even though they don't have a history of disenfranchisement or voter oppression, they tend to be, in my area, fairly educated, well-off people who've not been oppressed in terms of voting, like some have. They have come to distrust their voting system. And that is something that's very important and that we're not sufficiently listening to. If you're dismissive of your voters' distrust of your voting system, I urge you to reconsider that. Secondly, I want to talk just briefly about the Sarah Riggs Amico litigation. I'm into my nerdy stage here. Those of us that have run these elections and lost them statewide understand that there's a voter drop-off statistically. I've put on your desk today this chart that shows the voter drop-off for Sarah Riggs Amico. That was only in Democratic counties and was not evident in any way in absentee ballots. About 10:30 on the night of the election, she, being a data nerd, started calling around to understand this deviation, this dagger drop of votes. At 2:30 a.m., they had statistical experts on the phone, and at 10:30 a.m., they were in intense research of what happened. The MIT election unit, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and other experts in reviewing this dagger drop for the lieutenant governor's race in the Democratic lieutenant governor's race in 2018 said that in 50 years of election data review, they'd never seen anything like this. I'm going to repeat that. In 50 years of election data review, they had never seen a drop-off like this. The lines that show the steady decline of voter drop-off are consistent, and this is not explainable. Sarah Riggs Amico did not file the lawsuit. Others did, and ESS immediately said, intellectual property, proprietary interest, you're not entitled to know the guts of my machine. That is their that's their legal stance in Pennsylvania, in Tennessee, and across the nation. Sarah Riggs Amico is not entitled to data that explains this. When you put in a new ballot marking machine that is barcode only, or other technologies that others can explain better, and you have something like this happen to you, please know that the machine operator, the vendor who we're going to give $500 million to, will not be available to answer your questions. I say to you, fiscal conservatives and friends, please listen to the voters in your district that are concerned about unable to trust their votes. Please look to the future. Please do not worry about the hanging chad, the pencil piece of paper, the cheetah, the frog, or the Quitman County probate judge. Please let's move forward. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Leader, you have 4 minutes remaining. Chair recognizes the Minority Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank everyone for their attention to this debate, because fundamentally this is the cornerstone of our democracy that we're talking about. You know, in Luthersville, we have a plain way of saying things, and we get a little suspicious when people want to dress something up and call it something different. And I just want to call your attention to something in section 31 of the bill. If you just look with me there at line 31 and line 33, and I'm holding in my hand something that in line 33 is defined as a ballot marking device. In Luthersville, we call this a pen. And the reason that's important is because when you start to give technical definitions to just everyday things, you got to slow it down. And we need to slow it down with this bill. Because if you look at, in addition to this being a ballot marking device, it says that there's something called an electronic device. And if you look down to see an electronic ballot marker, and if you look down at the definition of electronic ballot marker in lines 43 through 48, it takes 5 lines of code to describe what an electronic ballot marker is. Here's the key provision in what this is all about. If you look at the end of line 46 and the beginning of line 47, interpret ballot selections. You know what? This ballot marking device cannot interpret ballot selections. I make the choice. I bubble it in. I feed it through the scanner, and that's it. It's tabulated. The electronic ballot marking device, by definition, interprets your ballot selection. Let that sink in. We are putting something between your vote and your vote getting counted. I know this House. I know there are members in this House that have reservations about this process. I know members in this House want to make sure that the integrity of the vote of every Georgian is protected. But this bill doesn't do it. This bill permits barcodes. What's a barcode? You know, they run through, and instead of something that is a clearly bubbled in oval or a marked oval, it's like a UPC scanner that nobody can tell what it is, that involves programming, interpretation by an external machine. Yes, it's hackable. Cybersecurity experts have told us that. But you know what? At the end of the day, what this is all about is voters having trust and confidence that their vote is counted. Trust and confidence in the outcome of the election. That's the legitimacy. When we vote, the legitimacy of what we do is that voters have elected us and that they understand that we constitute this body. This bill does not give us that. The 40th President of the United States had a great 3-word saying that applies to this bill. Trust, but verify. And this bill has no verification, and voters do not trust it. It is absent under that standard. I'm asking you to slow it down. Vote no. We have time. We have our own bill, 433, that addresses this issue. Stand with voters, not with the vendors. Send the vendors in the hall a message. Vote no. Let's get this right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
That completes the minority report time. We now go on to the chairman's time, which is also a total of 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee, Chairman Reinders, for the chairman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, everyone. For all you freshmen, welcome to the world of politics. If you think this is bad, wait till redistricting comes. Those are the two things that always get everybody talking, the elections and redistricting. I want to talk to you about what we talk about in South Georgia, and that is shucking it down to the cob. What is real? I want to talk about what was said in committee, because we're reminded what was said in committee, so let's talk about some of that. You're welcome to your own opinions, and you're welcome to your own narrative, but you're not welcome to make up your own facts. My name is Ed Reinders, R-Y-N-D-E-R-S, and I've heard it pronounced Riders and Renders, and it's been misspelled. And in committee, that was the reason why someone intentionally didn't let somebody vote. That was said. I've had people mispronounce it since I was this high. That doesn't mean that there's a conspiracy out there. If you hire people to go out, if you get good-hearted volunteers to go out and register voters, and they turn in the wrong name, they misspell it, that's not a Secretary of State's fault. That's not a local official's fault. That's not my fault. It happens. You own some of that. So when we talk about trust, voter trust, y'all, that's so important. I don't think there's anybody in here. I think the last phrase was trust and confidence. I don't think there's anybody in here that hasn't won, that hasn't said, I appreciate the confidence the voters just showed in me by returning me to office or electing me. The confidence was good enough then to elect you. You know, it's kind of like the justice system. I know and y'all know that sometimes right, wrong, and we wish there was a perfect system, that innocent people go to jail. And we know sometimes guilty people get away with it. I wish that we could wave a magic wand and find the 100% perfect way to vote so everybody had the standard of public confidence that you want. But as long as you sell that narrative, as long as you say the bar is this, it has to be 100% confidence, it's not obtainable. We've got to do the best we can do. I'm confident that this bill does this. We can talk about security. I'm not going to make it partisan, but listen to me. You can't talk about security and put bills in my committee that allow people to vote multiple times. We've talked about this multiple times with no security, with no way of checking because we don't have broadband in all places. You can't say, I care about the cost of elections in Georgia if you're introducing bills that says we want the locals to pay for an absentee ballot in every race, and then say, and me not be able to ask you, where's your fiscal note? Now that's intellectual honesty. That's some of the other bills. You're arguing cost and you're arguing security, but you're promoting bills, you put them in governmental affairs that don't have a fiscal note, that doesn't have a cost element that on the local governments. That's why the ACCG is for it. That's the truth. You can't say that you care about security and introduce bills that you can't verify how many times they vote in some places that don't have broadband. I don't know how we'll ever get the public confidence if all you want to do is run commercials saying, call so-and-so because you were cheated. We own that narrative when we sell that. When we sell, all we are is victims, and it was stolen from us with illegitimate president, illegitimate governor, illegitimate this. That happens all the time in politics. That is the part of politics, y'all, to be honest with you, that I hate the most. That's why we can't move together, is because both sides run to our base. It's false narrative. That hurts us in politics, and it will always hurt us. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Trey Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman yields part of his time to the Majority Caucus Whip Kelly. Whip Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I appreciate the debate that's gone on today, and I appreciate those who have worked on getting us to House Bill 316. There's been a lot of bipartisan conversation and a lot of bipartisan efforts which have gone in to making this a good bill. I want to start first by making something clear, however, that in this election, more votes were cast and counted than have ever been counted in Georgia election history. We've heard it once, I've said it, I'll say it again, more votes were cast and counted than ever before in Georgia history. Now in 2018, there may have been failed ideas, and there may have been failed candidates. One who continues to run TV ads and campaign trying to raise her national profile. But hear me loud and clear. There was no failed system. And I'll say it again louder for those in the back. There was no failed system. In House Bill 316, we have worked to address concerns of the minority party. Our leadership has worked with their leadership to incorporate changes that would help make our system better. And in fact, I want to thank one of the members of the minority party who placed something on our desk a minute ago. Many of you may still have it. If you do, I want you to grab it and take a look at it with me. It says Georgia's Voting System Principles. And it's endorsed by groups such as Pro Georgia, the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, the ACLU, and the People's Agenda. And let me tell you what they're asking for. They're asking for, first, a voter verifiable paper trail. Well, if you'll turn to Section 18 in House Bill 316, check, marks the box. They're asking for a risk limiting audit. If you turn to Section 43, check, marks the box. They're asking for a system for maintaining a chain of custody for ballots. If you switch again to Section 26, there it is. Oversight of elections and audits that includes citizen participation. Take a look at Section 43 of House Bill 316. There it is. And their final point, a uniform voting system across all jurisdictions in this state. If you'll look at Section 18, line 381, it spells out clear that this is a uniform system across our state. They go further to say Georgia voters, election system officials, and election workers are accustomed to a uniform system with standard training, protocols, and procedures. That's exactly what House Bill 316 does, and I appreciate the support of these organizations for House Bill 316. Now, we've had a lot of discussion today about experts and cost, but there can be no one who's a greater expert on voting systems than our election officials. This weekend, I had the opportunity to travel back to Cedartown, and I got to speak with one of my poll workers. And they told us that they want us to stay with the system that they're familiar with, that voters are familiar with. Chairman Reinders placed on your desk another note from 12 different counties across southwest Georgia. Counties like Lee County, Terrell County, Worth County, Doherty County, Calhoun County, Early County, Miller County, Mitchell County, Colquitt County, Thomas County, Decatur County, and Seminole County endorsing House Bill 316. This does not have to be a partisan issue. Finally, we've heard a lot of talk about costs today, and I appreciate the minority party finally caring about government spending. But as we see, ACCG has talked about the unfunded mandates. ACCG says ballot marking devices with a paper trail will initially cost more. No one's denying that. Than hand-marked paper ballots and the scanners to read them, but will result in long-term overall savings for counties on behalf of the counties of Georgia and the ACCG Policy Council. Please support House Bill 316. That's one important thing when we're talking about costs, Mr. Leader. But there's another. And that's the cost of the disenfranchisement that would take place to the disabled citizens across our Georgia if we implemented the system that the minority party has advocated for today. Now, we're all going to have an opportunity shortly to look down at that button and cast up on that ballot whether we're going to stand with a system that empowers our disabled community to vote. And if you do, I ask you to hit that green button. But there will be some who, straight for partisan politics, will decide to disenfranchise our disabled voters. That's going to be unfortunate. I would ask you to reconsider and vote yes on House Bill 316, and I'll yield the well.
For the final word, Chair recognizes the Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Fleming, for the remaining 8 minutes of the Chairman's report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a robust debate here today, and we're about to take a vote. I want to just remind you of a few things before we do that. The Majority Whip touched on it just a second ago, but there hasn't been a lot of talk out of the minority party here today during this discussion about how their choice would affect disabled and handicapped voters. The closest that came to it was my good friend Miss Oliver when she said, "I wonder what the courts will think about the system we're about to vote on." I'm going to tell you what the courts are going to think about the system we're about to vote on if we make disabled voters vote differently than the rest of us with the choice of the minority party with a pencil or pen marked ballot. The Americans with Disabilities Act says if you can accommodate disabled persons in the same way that someone without a disability is accommodated, you need to do that. That's why you haven't heard much discussion from them about that point, because they know their system of a pencil or pen marked paper ballot forces, by their own admission in committee and so forth, that disabled voters have to vote on something different. What do they make them vote on? By their own admission, a touchscreen ballot marking device. When you vote today, vote in support of not treating those with disabilities different than we treat ourselves. The system that we've asked you to vote for in House Bill 316 is more secure, it is less expensive, and it is the most accessible system that we can come up with in Georgia. Election directors overwhelmingly support House Bill 316, the people that run our elections every year. The Georgia public overwhelmingly supports ballot marking devices. So what I'm going to do now is ask you to vote for this, and here's how I'm going to ask you to vote for it. I'm going to ask you to take your finger, and I'm going to ask you to touch an electronic device. And then after you've voted, I'm going to ask you to look at your ballot to make sure it is correct, because that is the same way that House Bill 316 will allow the voters of Georgia to vote. So now, vote for what is right for Georgia. If it's good for the House of Representatives and the Senate of Georgia, it's good for the voters of Georgia. Support House Bill 316. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
The previous question has been ordered. What purpose does Representative Cannon rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that members need a committee chair to request a fiscal note, and there are at this time no Democratic committee chairs?
Well, I think there's a reason there's not any.
Further parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that the People's Agenda, ACLU, Common Cause Georgia, League of Women Voters have not in any way stated their support for House Bill 316, so the implication that they might support this bill needs a correction?
If the lady so states, I really don't keep up with special interest groups on either side, frankly. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? For what purpose does Representative Oliver rise?
Parliamentary inquiry,
State your
sir.
inquiry.
Is the chairman of judiciary implying that every one of our good election officials and poll workers will intentionally violate the federal law and not help disabled voters as they're required to do so in every case?
I did not interpret his comments to mean that. What purpose does Representative Lopez Romero rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that when we press our button, it will be a person hand-marked pressing of that button?
Well, I think you use your finger to press the button.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and you
But
are a
we're not going to
human.
mark the voting machine up there with a pencil. I don't know how it gets up there. I mean, I'm just being honest. I don't know. What purpose does Chairman Pruitt rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your
Speaker.
inquiry.
Is it not true that earlier that someone in the well spoke of Dodge County and some improprieties, I guess, that were held during an election? And during that time, was it not true that all elected officials were Democrats?
I'm going to let you and Representative Oliver have a discussion in a corner here about that. Okay, I'm going to do one more parliamentary inquiry. We've been on this bill a long time. What purpose does Chairman Setzler rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that all these circumstances of voter fraud and throwing elections were done with hand-marked paper ballots? And the system we have today is the most secure, multi-tiered security system to give us confidence in our votes that includes paper, but has other technology to safeguard our vote. Mr. Speaker, isn't that true?
I'm sure the gentleman believes that to be true. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 316 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 316. The ayes are 101, the nays are 72. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. What purpose does Chairman Fleming rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move for immediate transmittal of House Bill 316 to the Senate.
Chairman Fleming has moved for immediate transmittal of House Bill 316 to the Senate. Is there objection? Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so ordered. Clerk will read the caption to a group of privileged resolutions. We have none. We're going on now to announcements. House will remain in order a few more minutes. We're going on to announcements. If you have signed up for an announcement, please make your way to the front of the chamber. The chair recognizes for an announcement the chair of the Game, Fish, and Parks Committee, Chairman Rhodes. He waves. Chair recognizes the chair of the Motor Vehicles Committee, Chairman Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members of the Environmental Quality Subcommittee of Natural Resources will meet upon adjournment in room 506 in the CLOB. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative David Clark for an announcement. He waives. Chair recognizes Representative Schofield for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, tomorrow is Lupus Awareness Day. Those of you that have ordered capes should have your purple cape. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to present to you a lupus cape for tomorrow. Wear your purple.
Chair recognizes the Chair of the Insurance Committee, Chairman Smith, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Insurance Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in room 606 CLOB. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Benton for an announcement.
House Retirement Committee will meet immediately upon adjournment in room 515. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the Chair of the Regulated Industries Committee, Chairman Alan Powell, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Regulated Industry Committee, we will meet in 506 just as soon as those other meetings that are backed up in front of us get on out. So, you know, don't stray too far.
Chair recognizes Chairman Dollar for an announcement.
Thank you, Speaker. The Energy Telecommunications Committee will meet, well, actually, there will be a telecommunications subcommittee meeting upon adjournment upstairs in 403 for one short measure, and then full committee will meet following that. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman England for an announcement.
Just a reminder, 7:30 tomorrow morning, full appropriations, Capital 341, and we'll be taking up the FY20 budget. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Setzler for an announcement.
The House Committee on Science and Technology meeting this afternoon is canceled due to some scheduling conflicts. It's canceled today. We will reschedule the speaker for another date. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Harrell, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, the Sales Tax Subcommittee and the Ad valorem Tax Subcommittee are postponed. We'll try to reschedule those for tomorrow. The Income Tax Subcommittee will meet in about 10 minutes and 1:33. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Cooper for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Health and Human Services will meet. Let's say 4:15. We will have an abbreviated group of bills to vote on. We will meet in 606 at 4:15. See you there.
Chair recognizes Chairman Silcox for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The MARTAC Committee will still meet on adjournment in 406. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the Majority Caucus Whip, Representative Kelly, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Kelly Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee will meet upon adjournment of the Welch Subcommittee, which will meet upon adjournment of the full Judiciary Committee. So we look forward to having y'all all there.
Chair recognizes Chairman Barr for an announcement.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, y'all. Just wanted to remind you that the Home Builders Association today has a 4:30 to 6 o'clock reception over in the Sloppy Floyd building. Both the governor and the lieutenant governor will be there as well. So just want to remind y'all, 4:30 to 6:30, Home Builders Association. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Fleming for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Judiciary Committee will meet in the Judiciary Committee room 20 minutes upon adjournment of the House. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Tarvin for an announcement.
Insurance Committee on Subcommittee on Property and Casualty will meet in CLOB 415 as soon as you can get there. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Jeff Jones for an announcement.
Thank you. The Admin Licensing Subcommittee of the Insurance Committee will meet approximately 30 to 45 minutes after adjournment in CLOB 406.
Chair recognizes the Majority Leader for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All of you that are involved in the 12th Congressional District DOT Board election, we will meet immediately upon adjournment in the Senate chamber. Those in the 12th Congressional District, we will be electing our DOT board member today. Thank you.
If you have lost an earring, I see everybody reaching for their ear. If you have lost an earring, someone's turned one in up here at the podium, so you need to see the House Messenger about reclaiming. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader of the House for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this House stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, February the 27th, 2019.
The Majority Leader has moved that this House be adjourned until Wednesday, February the 27th, 2019 at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. This House will be adjourned until Wednesday, February 27 at 10 a.m.